And hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Cable. Chapters is the television program that sponsors and profiles local authors, editors, and publishers in our community. I'm Elliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. Our author this week and our guest this week on the program is author Casey Bond, and Casey resides in Milton, West Virginia with her husband and her two daughters. She graduated magna cum laude from Marshall University in 2003 with a BA in criminal justice with legal studies emphasis. She attended Hurricane High School and lives only 6 miles from her hometown, and she loves the beauty in the hills and the valleys that make up West Virginia. We're delighted to have her with us here on Chapters. Casey, hello. Thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Let's talk a little bit about you as a writer. How did you get started in writing? How did you decide you wanted to be an author? How did that whole process start for you?
Well, it was kind of fast. I've always loved to write, and you know, when we were going through school, everybody would complain about the papers we were assigned, but I would kind of jump on it and go. So I always loved to write, and I was pregnant with my second daughter, and I could not sleep at night at all, and I was just uncomfortable, and my mom kind of gave me an idea for Winter Shadows, and I started typing one evening when I couldn't sleep, and 2 months later I had a book, so well, at least the first draft. So
Sure. And that leads me to my next question. Do you find yourself as a writer, now with 2 books out, and we'll talk about your 2 books here in just a little bit, but do you find yourself writing every day? Do you find that as a habit, or do you just write sporadically, or how does the writing process work for you?
I am a stay-at-home mom with 2 little girls, one's 6 and one's 2, so I don't have as much time to write as I, like to have, but I try to, my oldest is in school, and when she's in school, I try to write while my youngest is napping, and then once they go to sleep, I try to write a little bit. Sometimes I get to it every day, and sometimes I don't, but I don't stress about it either way. I want writing to be something that I enjoy and can do when I feel, passionate about what I'm getting ready to write, so.
And you are the author of 2 novels, Devil Creek and Winter Shadows. And I know Winter Shadows, you had a book signing at Empire Books and News
Yes.
not too long ago, which is where we are now. And we appreciate them having us here on Chapters and hosting us for this episode. Talk to us a little bit first about Devil Creek before we get into Winter Shadows. Tell us a little bit about the plot behind that book, what goes on in that book, who's involved, and what happens there.
Okay, Devil Creek is set here in West Virginia. It's set in Mingo County, and it supposedly takes place out this creek named Devil Creek, which doesn't actually exist, but it does in my mind. But it follows a young lady named Aislinn. She had lost her brother in Afghanistan. He was an army soldier, and he got killed in an IED blast. His best friend, Gabriel, comes home and sort of is her big brother protector, and the two kind of fight an attraction and love to one another. And it's just about them coming together and fighting against, they almost feel like it's betraying her brother and his memory to be together. So it's just about their love and the hardships that they face and accepting that.
Let me ask you a little bit about one of the things that happens there in Devil Creek is that we really get to see 2 viewpoints from 2 characters,
Right.
which I think is really interesting. Oftentimes in literature, we only follow one viewpoint. Maybe we have an
Right.
omniscient narrator, maybe we're dealing with a first-person narrator, but here we get to see 2 viewpoints of 2 different characters. One is named Mac, and one is named Gabe. Tell us a little bit about them as characters, and what do they bring to the narrative structure as we follow them through the story.
I think when you get 2 different viewpoints, you kind of get into their heads a little bit more. You know what each character is thinking and how that character feels, and you can you can see their mannerisms, and you can see how they react to certain situations, and it just kind of gives the story a bit more depth.
One thing I can tell you a little bit in reading Devil Creek that I really liked, and you talked about those multiple viewpoints, and I really felt like that the emotions they were feeling, the anger, the frustration, everything that they felt as a character, I felt like I was experiencing because I was sort of on their shoulder watching as they go through their story and go through their storyline. And something else I thought that was interesting is you did a good job of sort of tying together their storylines and making sure that they do intersect at some point and they kind of weave together to the overall narrative. Was that something that was easy to do? Is that difficult to do when you're managing 2 different viewpoints?
This was the easiest book to write so far for me. I don't know why, but when I sat down and I sort of had, I'm sort of a person that just sits and writes. I don't have a plot. I don't have note cards. I just sit and type, and whatever comes out, I can deal with the second draft later. You know what I mean? But this was the easiest to write for me. For some reason, the story that popped in my head was just easy to flow out of my fingers onto the screen for some reason. It was awesome.
Let me ask you a little bit about the imagery that you use in the book, because I think that is something that is really terrific, and something that pulled me in as a reader was the imagery. I mean, I was in that setting. I mean, I could feel what it was like. I could see what it was like. Is that something that you favor as a writer, like to include that imagery, or was it just something that you felt like came about as you were trying to describe this place in Mingo County?
I like imagery when I read a book. I don't like so much that I can't put my own imagination into it and picture things myself. So I don't like to describe every single little tiny detail, but I like enough detail to where it's almost like a movie for me in my mind when I read a book, and I can kind of put myself in the scene and be there with the characters and watch what's going on.
Let me ask you a little bit about the ending
Okay.
and how the book ends, without giving too much
Okay.
away. How do you bring this storyline, this plot to a conclusion, and how do Mac and Gabe sort of fit into what happens at the end of the book?
Well, at the end of the book, they basically have to determine, I don't want to give too much away, but they basically have to determine whether or not they are able to forgive one another for things that they've done, and whether or not they feel that their love is worth pursuing for the long term. And so I don't want to give too much away, but it's got a good ending.
Yes, it
Happy
does.
ending.
And if you're interested in that kind of a story, about forgiveness and about relationships, I think any of our readers would be really interested in Devil Creek. It's a terrific book.
Thank you.
So congratulations to you on that. And your most recent publication, Winter Shadows, we certainly want to talk a little bit about that. We mentioned that you had a book signing down here at Empire Books and News not long ago. Tell us a little bit about Winter Shadows. What's the storyline there, and where on earth did you get the impetus to write that kind of a story?
Well, Winter Shadows is set in Mingo County as well. It is set in an actual location. It's set in Dingus, and it's a dystopian young adult book. It's got a Christian flair to it. Not preachy or anything, but it's part of the character. The main character is Claire, and her father is the deacon of a church. She had lost her mother to cancer, and she sort of has a crisis of her own faith. The government says there's a pandemic and starts putting people into quarantine encampments to keep them safe and to keep people from spreading the virus. And her father doesn't trust what the government's saying, so he and some other members of their community, they travel to Mingo County and they live in these caves. And so she's young and she's been sort of sheltered, and she's depressed from losing her mom, and she has to deal with living in these damp, awful caves and learning how to shoot a bow and fish and just be self-sufficient, and then find her faith back, reestablish her faith in God.
So I wanted to ask you about the religious aspect of
Sure.
Winter Shadows, because it is a significant part of the story.
Yes.
But I think one of the things that's unique about how you do that is it's not a heavy-handed approach to religion. I mean,
Right.
she's looking for that. She's sort of looking for for redemption in some ways, as you're saying. But religion kind of guides the story. It's not a religious book, so to speak.
Right.
How did you work the religion in, and did you have to be conscientious as a writer not to be real heavy-handed with the religion, because that could turn off some readers?
I never really thought about it. I just saw it as part of her character and who she was and how she grew up, and I wasn't trying to send a particular message. I just wanted to show how her religion was part of her life, and how certain people can lose their faith in God, but they can also get it back. So that was part of it. But it just flowed. It wasn't something I planned at all.
Let me ask you a little bit about there's a strange boy, a mysterious boy in
Yeah.
this story, who at some point rescues Claire in the story.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about this strange boy. And again, we don't want you to give too much away,
Right.
but where does he come from, and what is his role, and what happens to Claire as she goes through the story?
Well, he is Colin, and she goes to the caves with a few different young people from her community. And her best friend is Ethan, and he shows kind of an interest in her, as a young woman. And so she just doesn't know if she's ready for that. She's just kind of been uprooted from her, she has to leave her mom behind. Where she was buried, she has to leave her home. She's just uprooted, and she just doesn't know which direction she wants to go. So Colin comes out of nowhere, and actually I'm going to read an excerpt where he kind of steps into the picture here in a minute. He is an outsider. He also was kind of hiding. He didn't want to go into the quarantine camps. And He's interesting because he was given certain gifts from God to protect Claire when she was threatened in different ways, but also those gifts allowed her protection from him when he kind of, the story kind of turns, and he does too. So I don't want to give too much away.
Okay, I totally understand. Totally don't want to ruin
Yeah.
the story for the readers. Absolutely, I totally understand that. You know, something else I want to ask you that I enjoyed about that book was that, you know, Claire really develops a sense of community, and we see this community form around her and the other characters, as you mentioned. And her father, because of the quarantine, sort of moves everybody into these caves, but from that major community in which they were all involved, they form a little bit of another community, and we see
Right.
Claire kind of grow accustomed to that. Can you tell us a little bit about the role that some of the other people, her father and some of the other characters from the town, play in what happens to Claire throughout the story?
Yeah, I mean, some of them are mentors. She sees some of the ladies sort of take charge and, you know, guide the other young people and show them things like today's society. We go to the grocery store when we want something. These ladies had to, you know, grow and can food, or, you know, cook food that is canned and preserved, and they just sort of the men and the women, the older men and women, showed the younger people how to survive and how to exist in a primitive way like we had to before, you know, all these modern conveniences. And they show them how to pray and love and just try to be good role models for them.
You mentioned at the beginning of our interview that this was a dystopian story.
Yeah.
What is dystopian, and what is that in terms of a subgenre of literature?
It is, it's basically when a society, it seems like a utopia, but it's not. There's something wrong. There's something in the background that just, it doesn't make this click. A lot of the popular books in the genre right now are like The Hunger Games, you know, and Divergent, and the, behind me, I've got Mockingjay and everything, but, you know, those are really popular books right now. And that's actually my favorite to read, so it was exciting to write this.
So what are some of the challenges do you find in writing that dystopian novel in terms of, you know, I'm thinking about, when you're talking about dystopian novels, I think about John Steinbeck's East of
Yeah.
Eden,
Oh,
which is
yes.
very much a dystopian
I
novel.
love that book,
You know,
yes.
probably one of my favorite books, and where we have this beautiful, scenic, and lush Salinas Valley, but it's hiding a deep-seated evil that goes on with the Trask family.
Right.
So at what point, you know, when you're writing a dystopian novel, do you determine this is where I have to kind of shift away from this being a utopian society, start to show some cracks in this society or some cracks in this world, and let the reader see that things are not always as they seem? How do you do that? When do you do that? When did you do it in Winter Shadows?
I think you have to sort of world build with a dystopian novel. Things are not as they seem, but you don't see that right away. Things look hunky-dory, they look perfect, everybody's happy until, you know, maybe midway through the novel, where things just aren't quite adding up. We don't know why there's this secret, or we don't know why society is hiding this, or why they're going this direction. In Winter Shadows, I kind of established that pretty quickly with the pandemic. My mom actually, she gets all the credit for coming up with the just general plot for this one. She had thought about instead of a pandemic, maybe microchipping people and stuff. And I didn't go that far. I thought wanted something more immediate for Winter Shadows, why people had to be, you know, tucked away and why they would have to run. And a pandemic fit that for me. If a pandemic happened today, it would be immediate and swift action, probably, to keep the virus from spreading outside of the community, outside of the country. So that kind of is why I went that direction with Winter Shadows.
All right, very good. Let me ask you about where you got your title, Winter Shadows. Where does Winter Shadows come from?
Well, the book starts out, they leave right, when they go to the caves, they leave right as winter's beginning, and right at the end of fall, beginning of winter. And it kind of follows her depression and how she kind of feels through the book, and how the depression and the things of her life that were bad kind of cling to her and follow her like a shadow, sort of. So Claire has to overcome a lot of different things, and as she goes, you know, further on into the year and gets more comfortable living in the caves and living in the environment she's living in, and getting her confidence back, those shadows sort of start fading away, and she starts gaining her confidence and standing on her own 2 feet.
I know we want to give you an opportunity in the few moments we have remaining with you today to let you share with us a passage from Winter Shadows. I know you picked out a passage and you had alluded to it a few moments ago, that we were going to find out a little bit about Colin and where he kind of makes his presence in the story and his interactions with Claire. So set the scene for us a little bit. Where are we? At what point in the story are we? And then we'll let you read some excerpts from your book.
Okay, this is probably midway through the book, and Claire is fishing by herself. A lot of times, as girls, we need some alone time. We need to kind of get out there and just, she's wading in the water and fishing and just kind of getting out in the sunshine, because every once in a while, you just got to get away. So she's out there fishing. She's caught a couple fish, and she hears a strange sound, and it is a bear.
Right.
So this is part of Winter Shadows. It began to slowly cross the creek where earlier I'd been wading in the rapids. It never took its eyes off me, and I never let it out of my sight either. I left the bucket of fish and pole and began to back further up the hill, trying to put as many trees as possible between it and me. I moved a bit quicker than I had initially in my retreat, trying to put some distance between the massive animal and myself. I prayed it would find the fish in the bucket and make a meal out of them so that I could make a run for the cave. I kept trekking backwards up the hill, but it kept coming toward me. It was huge. Its thick head of black fur bristled. My palms became sweaty as it bared its teeth and began to growl at me. My heart was beating out of my chest, and my breathing was shallow and fast. The worst part, I was alone, and I couldn't yell for help for fear of endangering all who lived in the cave. Not only from the bear, but the guard, too. It was almost to the hill's summit, and the unforgiving creature wouldn't stop coming toward me. It sniffed around, but left the bucket, fish and all, down below. Then it started to pick up its pace. There was no way I could outrun it. I knew I had no choice but to try to shoot it. I grabbed an arrow and nocked it, pulling the bowstring in a taut line that grazed my right cheek. My hands were shaking, and I was so scared my teeth were chatting. This is it. I shut my eyes and winced, not wanting to kill the animal. Then I heard the beast let out a painful-sounding scream and thumped to the ground as it fell backwards. I looked into my hands, and the arrow was still there. I hadn't let it go. What had happened? I looked above and behind me to the top of the hill, and that's when I saw him. He was standing there with his bow still in his hand. It had been his arrow that had pierced the bear. Although he had saved me, I was more afraid of him than I had been of the animal. I just stood there and stared at him, my mouth hanging open in disbelief. A million questions flooded my mind. Who was he? Where had he come from? How long had he been watching me? Was he the one who made the sounds from yesterday and today? Was he with the guard? Would I be taken to one of those camps? Would he be able to find the others, and were they safe? Why had he saved me? Stay back, he ordered as he quickly walked down the hill toward the bear. It was still making some kind of groaning noise and wasn't dead yet. He took out a large knife and held up the bear's head and quickly and stealthily slit its throat. Its body slumped and fell lifeless, and the red blood sprayed and flowed all over the ground around it. Oh my goodness, I'm dead. He was tall, over 6 feet. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and his eyes were a deep blue color, though I'd only made eye contact for a second as he passed me by. He seemed to be about my age and was dressed in black pants, black shirt, black boots. I was sure he was with the guard. He looked strong and serious. I was paralyzed, but when I realized I could move, I started to back away, though I didn't know where I would flee. He couldn't hide from his bow. I couldn't hide from his bow, and I couldn't run back to the cave either. Then he would find the others. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I didn't want to be here. He looked up at me as I began to ease backward. Stop, he said loudly, and then more softly. Stop, please. Look, he said, I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not a member of the guard either. How can I believe you? I asked nervously, still attempting to ease backwards and away from him. If you were with the guard, would you admit it? I challenged. He looked up from the bear, smiled, and said, No, I probably wouldn't, but I'm not with the guard. I live nearby, as do you, I take it.
Excellent. What a fantastic passage. That's one of my favorite sections of the book, too.
Thanks,
so I'm
too.
so happy that you read that and shared that with us. Casey, let me ask you, as we finish up with you today, if any of our viewers in the audience are interested in getting a copy of either Winter Shadows or Devil's Creek, how can they get a copy of your book?
Winter Shadows is on Amazon. It's on my website. It's Barnes & Noble. Any of the major distributors have it. It's through Tate Publishing. Devil Creek right now is online at Amazon exclusively, and I think around March 23rd it'll be on Barnes & Noble and different I think you can, actually, I think you may be able to get paperbacks at Barnes & Noble right now. But it should be available through Smashwords and different things like that in March.
Fantastic. Well, we certainly look forward to that. And Casey Bond, author of the books The Devil Creek and Winter Shadows, thank you so much for being with us here on Chapters today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And we also want to give a special thanks to Empire Books and News, located here at Pullman Square in Huntington, for hosting us for this episode of Chapters. We encourage you to stop by Empire Books and News anytime you're looking for something to read. They have the Tri-State's largest selection of magazines, and if you have watched other Chapters programs and have been interested in some of the authors that we featured on the program, and you're interested in their books, if it's a novel, a collection of poems, a collection of short stories, or what it may be, you can find many of those copies right here at Empire Books and News. In fact, some of those books are even signed by the authors that we've had featured on Chapters. So if you want to check that out, we certainly encourage you to come down to Empire Books and News here at Pullman Square in downtown Huntington. Talk to Charlotte and her staff. They'll be happy to help you find those books, and we certainly appreciate them hosting us for this episode of Chapters. And finally, if you have a question, comment, or story suggestion about Chapters, we certainly would love to hear from you. You can send us an email to the email address that you'll see right here on the bottom of your screen in just a moment. It's lp4, the letter L, the letter P, the number 4, at zoominternet.net. We appreciate all the feedback and the response that we do get from you about our show Chapters, and so keep those comments and suggestions coming. We really do appreciate it. Well, that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters, but please come again next time, and in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.